Okay, one last little short topic on what's known as vectorization with Octave. Um, so there are a lot of problems that you can solve using loops, and you'd have to resort to using a loop in a traditional language. But many of these problems you can attack in a using a vector approach or a matrix approach and avoid the use of loops. And you'll find that your MATLAB code runs much faster if you can avoid the use of any sort of for loop or while loop. Again, that's a standard recommendation when working with MATLAB, and if you're trying to make your code faster, is to try to vectorize it, is the term that's used, and get rid of any loops. And as you become a little more proficient in MATLAB, you can figure out how to do that for a lot of different problems. I'm not going to make a big deal out of that. You know, if you want to use a loop now to solve a problem, go for it. It may be slower, but I'm not really concerned about that at this point, as we're just learning the language. So in this example, we want to find you know the number of values in a random vector that are greater than 0.4 and less than 0.6. So this will one way to do that would actually be, you know, after we form the vector, we could loop through it and then increase a counter every time we found a value within a range. But a much faster approach is just to use the find function. This would return all the indices for the numbers that are within that range, and then the length of the indice vector would tell us the number of values in that vector that are within that range. So again, kind of two approaches here. You know, a similar problem. We're taking the sign of a vector. We want to know how many of the values are in this vector are greater than 0. One is to actually loop through all the elements in the vector, and then if that element is greater than 0, increment a count value. So then when we get done, we can then display the count value. Another approach is, again, just using find. How many values are greater than 0? This will return a length, a vector containing all the indices, and then the length of that vector is the count. Here this shows a comparison of these two approaches. You know, using the loop method versus the find method. For vectors of length 100, the find method was so fast it couldn't even be clocked. Using 1,000,000 elements, you know, the loop method took 1.5 seconds. Again, it's pretty fast. Computers are fast. But using the find method, it was much faster. You know, this is 40 milliseconds or 4 100s. So what are you talking about? 10, and then perhaps about 40 times faster using find versus using a loop. So a general recommendation is avoid loops if you can. So there are a lot of clever MATLAB Octave techniques for avoiding loops. You don't have an option like this typically in many programming languages. You have to use a loop. But with the basic data type being a matrix or vector, there are typically much faster approaches in MATLAB. Loops are slow in MATLAB because it is a scripting language. Okay. So here's another example of, you know, we've got a vector of random numbers, and when we want to form a new vector by adding up all of the consecutive terms in the original vector. So again, first approach might be to actually use a loop here, looping over all the elements in A, forming this new vector that is the sum of the current element and the previous one. But, you know, a vectorized approach would be form a new vector that's pre-padded with 0, and then contains the first 99 elements out of A, and then just add that to A. So it's a vector addition, does the same thing, but it's much faster and avoids, you know, the for loop, the if, and everything. But it requires a little thought. Okay. So that's the end of this lecture. I'll get these videos posted and the assignment posted in just a few minutes.